Welcome to the EcoScientist podcast. My name is Amalya and I am your host. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about all things science, conservation, and climate. I'm going to dive deep into the ethics, the emotions, and the facts to bring you all the information you need to survive in the world of STEM. So sit down, chill out, and let's get into it. Welcome to episode 6 of the EcoScientist podcast. In my last episode, I spoke about reducing your impact on the environment, and I also told you guys that I would be taking a little time off podcasting to move house. So, update number 1 is that I'm officially all moved in, my cat is no longer scared of the staircase, and life is pretty good, which leads me into update number 2, which is that podcast episodes will be airing on Mondays every fortnight from now on. For my American listeners, you'll know this as bi-weekly. So basically, every 2 weeks on a Monday is where it's at. My third update is that the EcoScientist podcast now has a Patreon page. So if you like this week's episode and you want to hear more like it, and if you really want to have access to exclusive behind-the-scenes content, as well as heaps of bloopers, head over to the Patreon page and make sure you sign up. The link for this page will be in the show notes below, along with everything else that we link throughout this episode. So for this week's episode, I'm doing my very first interview with Jessie from Lonely Conservationists. So because Jessie is all the way in Melbourne, you guys will probably notice a bit of a change in the audio quality throughout the interview. I'm really sorry about that, but the chat is really amazing nevertheless, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So let's just jump right in. So here with me today, I have Jessie from Lonely Conservationists, and we're going to be talking all about that today. So a lot of my listeners are also followers and members of the Lonely Conservationist community, but for those of you who haven't heard of Lonely Conservationists before, Jessie, could you briefly describe what the Lonely Conservationist community is?
Sure. Lonely Conservationist started as an online platform for conservationists to share their stories of overcoming hurdles in the conservation industry and to have their feelings and thoughts normalized. Alongside of the website, there's an Instagram page, so conservationists had the opportunity to connect. It started off as just a way to publicize the blogs, but it turned into a very social platform where people were finding each other from the blogs and finding people with similar interests and connecting. So it's become a pretty robust community.
That's really cool. We will definitely link the Instagram for Lonely Conservationists in the show notes below. So if you guys want to check that one out, just head to the show notes. Do you think you could tell me a little bit about how Lonely Conservationists and particularly the blog came about and why you created it?
Sure. So I was sitting on my couch in January, really defeated after 26 years of thinking I had an opportunity in the conservation industry, getting really excited about it. And then the bosses or conditions I was faced with in those opportunities turned out to be not what I expected. Often really isolating conditions, really horrible people pushing me down, and I ended up having to leave quite a few of them. And there was all those long spaces of time in between where you're just waiting and waiting for opportunities, and then when you finally get something, you'll take it because it's just anything. And I thought I'd had enough of going through that process of finding opportunities, leaving them because they weren't suitable, waiting, and endless cycle of Groundhog Day of this going on and on. So at the start of this year, I decided I was going to work at a pretty reputable conservation organization I'd been volunteering at. And it was my New Year's resolution to actually get a job there. So I was working at the office about 8 hours every day for about 6 months, working on complex report writing and data analysis. And it got to the stage where my work was starting to influence funding opportunities, and I could tell that it was beyond a volunteer capacity and I should be starting to get paid for this work. But when I raised it and applied for jobs, even though they knew me and they knew the caliber of my work, they didn't want to hire me because they thought I didn't have enough professional experience in an organization or a professional corporate capacity. So my friends kind of sat me down and gave me an intervention that I was never going to get a job there as long as I was working for free. And so I was lying on the couch thinking, what am I going to do? Am I even worth being in the industry anymore? It never works out for me. I always end up having to leave. And then all the time when I'm doing really good work, I don't seem to be valued for this work. So I just felt really defeated, but my whole life has been spent in the industry and I couldn't imagine doing anything else. But as I was lying on the couch working out what I was going to do with the rest of my life, my friend messaged me from Spain, and she was having trouble getting a visa to go to Malaysia to finish her research on elephants. And she was stuck and I was stuck, and I realized there must be so many other people in the industry that are having these feelings as well. So I ended up putting my story on the website, and that was Lonely Conservationist. I created the Instagram page alongside of it just to find out if anybody else felt the same way as I did. And I guess the rest is history.
Yeah, that is really cool. I had no idea it was, I guess, that in depth, really. I can definitely relate to that, looking for opportunities and just kind of taking what you can get, because that's how I ended up in aquaculture, which is definitely not something you'd expect a bird lover to be doing. And that whole isolation thing seems to be way more common across conservation than what most people think. On the Lonely Conservationist blog, which you just spoke about, you said that you shared your story, and that's turned into people writing their own blog posts and sharing their own stories about their experiences in conservation. What would you say that the most common theme is throughout the blogs that are submitted to you, and what do you think about them, or how do you feel about the themes that people are discussing?
It seems to be two common themes that arose, and they really surprised me. So there was a lot of similar stories like mine where people have been facing a lot of struggle and just isolation, burnout, and feeling secluded from everybody else, or judged, or facing really mean mentors or bosses. And then there was the other side of it where some people were on the brink of ending it all and they had really bad lives. They were thinking there was nothing out there for them. And then on a few circumstances in the blogs, people have planted trees, and then it's given them hope and they found their place and they realized that there was more to life out there. So it's really crazy that conservation seems to be so dichotomous in that conservation has really hurt a lot of people and really tore them down, but it's also saved a lot of people's lives. So it's really crazy that both sides of that has shone through in the blogs.
Yeah, it seems like the whole conservation community is going through similar stuff, which really surprised me. I guess I experienced that burnout and isolation a lot throughout my own career, but I always thought that I was alone in it. So having Lonely Conservationists there is really such a reassuring thing to know that you're not alone, because I feel like the whole industry kind of makes you feel like that. And it's like this big scary thing to be, I guess, feeling like you're not good enough or feeling burnout. You know, everyone's on that hustle and grind kind of mentality. So it's really good and really interesting that so many people are sharing that they're feeling the same way.
Yeah, and it's crazy because I think so many people graduate and they want to get into conservation and they want environmentally based degrees, but there's only like 2 or 3 jobs at the end of the day and everybody is fighting towards them. So we're all trying to put our best foot forward, be as perfect as we can. And we're all pretending that we're not feeling these feelings of isolation and burnout because we want to be the one that's chosen for these select few jobs that exist. So I think that's cast a lot of mental health issues and a lot of feelings of insignificance or of not being valued amongst the people in the industry, because we just have to pretend we're this perfect entity to try and get 2 jobs that exist, and we're fighting everybody else, and it kind of fosters this mentality of working against each other instead of together. And I think Lonely Conservationist is trying to reverse all that and get people together and admit that there's something wrong, because the industry can't change unless we all start talking about what's actually happening and how we're actually feeling.
Yeah, exactly. It really just blows my mind. And I think that's why we come back to burnout, really, like you mentioned about, only having 2 or 3 job titles or 2 or 3 positions that are available within different places. And a lot of people travel for work. And so I guess a lot of us within the conservation community have this mindset of just taking what we can get. And sometimes I guess that means having nothing and then ending up with 4 jobs. And sometimes that means taking jobs that are in industries that you really don't enjoy being in, or maybe even in industries that you might be overqualified or even underqualified to work for just because it's work.
Yeah, there's so many conservationists that are baristas at the moment, I'm pretty sure. And especially I come from South Australia and there's not a lot of jobs there. The jobs that people do have, people grow old in them and die in them. And it's really, really rare that a job comes up. So it's almost impossible to find a job there in the field. And it's just crazy that in some locations you think there's no hope for you in the industry. And a lot of really talented people who are really passionate about the environment end up in administration or doing other things. And I feel like their talents are really wasted or lost just because they've been so disheartened at their future in conservation.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely relate to that one because, as many of you guys probably don't know, I actually work in a cafe, which Jessie and I were talking about, and she didn't know either. But yeah, I work in a cafe on weekends because even doing this and working casually at a university, it's really not enough to, I guess, support the needs that we have as humans. You know, it doesn't matter whether you're in conservation or not, you still have electricity to pay for and food and all those things. And I think that's what a lot of people forget about conservationists is that, working in this field is usually a bit of a sacrifice as well. And most people work more than one jobs, or they're working in things that aren't exactly having anything to do with their passion. So it's really interesting to see that I'm definitely not alone in this, and you aren't either. And it seems to be that many of the listeners and people throughout the Lonely Conservationist community aren't alone in that as well.
Yeah, and something we were talking about before as well is that both of us have had periods of unemployment and real lulls where we're just searching and searching for opportunities. And then, like, you have 4 jobs at the moment, and I'm doing a million things as well. And it just seems like when it rains, it pours. But because we have that mentality of saying yes and taking whatever opportunities we can, we carry that mindset on with us, and we never learn to say no. And then it just becomes burnout from trying too hard to get positions, and then burnout from having too many.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I've definitely experienced that. And I think one of the biggest things that I've experienced is, for me, I get to that burnout period and somehow I'll keep going through it. But the quality of work that I end up doing is just absolutely atrocious compared to what I'm capable of. You know, I can keep going, but it's definitely not going to be good. And I think that's something that we all need to, I guess, realize, that it's not possible to just keep on going and going. As much as it maybe seems like you can do that on the outside or looking at other people, you're not going to produce the best work in any sense. You know, I can work 40 hours in a cafe, but my writing is going to be absolutely trash, and that doesn't help me, you know, with my honors or with writing a thesis or anything like that. So I feel like a lot of us just need to take a step back sometimes and realize that, yes, working more hours might be good, or taking on another project might seem good at the start, but a lot of us really need to just realize that we can't have it all. We can't do it all. As much as we think everybody else is doing it all and having it all, a lot of people aren't. And there's a lot more going on behind the scenes that people don't realize. And I think we all just kind of need to chill out a little bit more, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. And there's like some perception in society that being busy is a good thing. Like when somebody asks you how you are and they haven't talked to you in a while and you're like, oh my God, I'm so busy. You wear it as a badge of honor, like something to be proud of. And I think that's so damaging in our society. Like we should be taking our lunch breaks. Like we should be taking that time in the middle of the day to sit out and just think about life, appreciate our food. But we think it's a badge of honor to be working through lunch and to go home and be like, I never see my family and I worked overtime today and my life is so important because I'm so busy. And that's just so destructive.
Yeah, that's definitely really toxic. And I have experienced that. I am always busy, and I always sat there and thought like, oh, this is really good. And I even experience a bit of guilt when I'm not busy. I don't know if you've experienced that too, but when you sit down on the couch for 5 minutes because you're absolutely exhausted and you're like, oh, crap, I've really got to go do this thing, because if I'm not doing this thing, I'm worthless, or whatever it is. And I think that we all need to kind of prioritize, I guess, that whole self-care thing and that taking time for ourselves again, because a lot of the time we don't do that unless we're on holiday. And even then I find myself replying to emails on my phone.
Yeah, you can't help it. It's just the culture. But I've started to look at resting and relaxation as a job that I need to do and start prioritizing it as something that's important to me. Like, especially if when you're an adult, you go to the doctor and sometimes things aren't always okay, or things with your family members, maybe their health is declining, and it really makes you think, I could work my ass off, and then on my deathbed, is that something I'm going to regret not working harder? Am I going to regret not sitting on the couch for 2 minutes? So I think the more I grow up, the more I realize the benefits of rest. And even though it's really hard and I do feel guilty about it, I'm trying to make it a priority that I don't feel guilty about that, and I take designated time to rest and do things I enjoy because it's productive and it's healthy for us to do. Yeah,
exactly. And like I said before, you know, when you're burnt out, you can't do your best work. And sometimes taking that time to rest or to do the things you like or go outside or, spend time with family, do absolutely nothing at all, will improve your mental clarity and your physical health and just everything in your life so much more. Because if you keep going, just like I said before, you're going to eventually come to a point where you're not doing good work. And I guess if you slow down, maybe you can kind of restart the cogs again. And for me, that means actually putting a time slot in my weekly timetable where I've said you literally need to do nothing for these 4 hours. And if you do something during these 4 hours, you've failed. So it's like a to-do list or a task for me is to actually do nothing, which is really interesting that I need to do that in order to be okay with it. But I guess it's part of the culture that we're in now.
Yeah, when I was unemployed, I took that to a bit of an extreme. I mapped out my week and I was like, I'm going to spend this many hours looking at birds and like just spending time in nature, and this many hours reading and learning new things, and this many hours working out and keeping my health in check, and this many hours applying for jobs and blah, blah, blah. But then that all became a chore, and these things that used to be so relaxing to me and so beneficial for my life started being things that I felt obligated to do. And I think it's so easy to take everything to an extreme, and then even resting feels like a chore if you have to schedule it in. And it's so weird in our society now how we're really struggling to just function as people and just to maintain and balance all these things in our lives. And I think for me, like not going to the gym one night and eating a pizza, that I saw that as a win. I was like, go you. You're just doing something that you want to do. Like, I'm proud of you, Jessie.
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. It's kind of sad how much I relate to that, to be honest. I think we all just need to chill out is basically the moral of that story. Chill out, do the things that you like, and stop worrying about this whole hustle and grind thing. And everyone needs to, I guess, stop comparing themselves to others, especially on social media and online, because what you see is not always what's there. And I guess if you do you, good things will happen.
Yeah, and that's the thing about Lonely Conservationists as well, is that conservation is often glorified on social media. You get a lot of people posing with animals or in beautiful landscapes, and you never really see what's going on behind the scenes. And I think from the people who come to Lonely Conservationists and they read these people's stories of what's actually happening for the first time, some people who are young in the industry and haven't experienced much, their whole reality of what goes on is really dramatically changed. And I think that's something that's pretty toxic in social media, is that we're only seeing one side of what's going on. And if that's all you're exposed to, that's all you think it is. So I think it's really interesting when we start telling our stories, how we can say like, look, we're all pretty messed up in different ways. And that's fine.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess that's the thing to remember is with social media, it usually is a highlight reel. I mean, if you look at my Instagram, there's plenty of beach photos, plenty of photos of me with animals. But this morning I spent 5 hours doing paperwork, sending emails and in meetings. And I mean, you can't really post that online. Well, you can, but I could take a photo of me sitting there doing paperwork and no one's really going to care about it. So I guess that's another reason that people don't see those things. But I think everyone needs to remember what goes on behind the scenes as well. And maybe just ask people, for some of my younger listeners out there, if you're interested in getting into conservation or getting into science, maybe message people that you look up to, even those that are on Instagram that you've seen and you love the look of what they do. Maybe message them and just say, hey, how did you get this opportunity? What does an average week look like for you? Because that way you probably won't be so shocked when you go into it of how much paperwork or meetings or emailing there really is to do, because there is a lot of it. And I'm not going to take photos of me doing meetings all day. That's pretty boring. So you're only going to see a highlight reel online.
Yeah, definitely. And I always think of Jane Goodall, how everyone worships her as this idol for conservation, but nobody thinks about the struggle she had alone as a woman in a forest, like not having any scientific background and being there, like having the expectation that she's going to come out with some discoveries. So I think everybody has those points in their life where they're struggling or alone or isolated, but that's not what we post and that's not what everybody hears about. So I think even the people you idolize, like David Attenborough and Jane Goodall, they all have a story and they all struggled to get where they are, but that's what makes us human. And I think even thinking about that makes them a bit more relatable, and it makes what they've achieved seem more achievable to people like us.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, a good example of that, now that you mentioned David Attenborough, is when he recently shot one of the documentaries. He was staying on Heron Island for a part of it, and he stayed in the resort there. And there were so many guests at the island, and so many people just like pretty much chasing him around to try and talk to him and get signatures and stuff. He had to go hide in the research station and eat his meals in a lab. And I guess that's pretty sad. He's such an amazing person, and you see him on all these documentaries and he's doing wonderful things and he's in all these beautiful places, but you don't see him hiding in a dark laboratory eating his dinner because people are outside, So I think it's always important to remember that there's so much more to every story than what you see.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you are in the conservation industry and you are struggling, or even if you want to see what it's like to be in the conservation industry, you should definitely read the blogs on the Lonely Conservationist website, because there's a range of different stories of what people have overcome in different countries and working in different fields. And I think it's just incredible the things that have happened that I never even thought was possible and has never happened to me. And I've worked across 7 countries. So I think it's always important to talk to different people about what's going on with them and really get to know people in this age of social media, where it's you just take everything at face value and you have pretty basic, superficial conversations. I think it's really amazing now when somebody actually wants to take the time to get to know you and gives you eye contact and gives you the time of day.
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely agree with looking at the blogs if you want a little bit more of an idea. It's a resource that I really wish I had at the start of my degree, or even before I chose my degree, so I knew what I was in for. It's definitely something that I am lucky enough that I have, I guess, equipped myself with and was prepared for by peers, because I did a lot of volunteering. But if it wasn't for that, I would be absolutely shocked. And it's really nice that there's a resource out there now, especially for young conservationists that might just be coming into the industry, or people who might be having a career change. You can definitely look through those blogs and learn a lot about what to expect. But from an outside perspective, it seems as though the whole Lonely Conservationist community has just kind of exploded overnight, and it's really incredible. Obviously, there's a lot more to it, especially time and commitment wise on your part. But the community, from my perspective, has just kind of come out of nowhere and grown really quickly. And in terms of the direction that it's taken, is it something you've anticipated, or have you changed the direction of Lonely Conservationists to kind of fit with the demand of the community?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because as I said before, when I created it, it was just because I was depressed on a couch and I just needed to see if anybody else was feeling the same way. So it was really unexpected to me that it would grow into what it has. It was always just going to be a blog, but when I saw how many people were facing the same struggles as me, it really made me think hard about how there's so many conservationists all over the world that are really struggling in the industry, and nobody's talking about it and nobody's trying to help them or provide resources for them. So I think this whole project has just evolved because of just my empathy for other people and not wanting them to go through what I had to go through. And I think now I think of myself as a bit of a conservationist, because I really have the drive to conserve and to help protect all these amazing people who are out in our ecosystems, really trying hard to protect the world for future generations. So one of the Lonely Conservationists actually gave me an advertisement for an incubator program. It was run by a Melbourne organisation, and they wanted to give business skills to environmentalists so we don't have to rely on grants or government funding, and we can take jobs into our own hands. So I ended up getting that incubator program. I was accepted, and ever since then I've been working on turning Lonely Conservationists into an actual business to help support the people in the community as a response to the incredible demand. Like, it's been 7 months since this community has existed, and already we're at 1,500 conservationists all sharing their stories and connecting with each other, and it's just phenomenal. I never could have predicted that this would happen.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you have, I noticed on your website, you sell stickers on there, and there's also some bracelets, and you've got a Patreon running. Is that the best way for people to support Lonely Conservationists?
Yeah, at the moment, the Patreon is a really good one, because you get all the behind the scenes videos every single week, behind the scenes updates of what's happening from a business and, I guess, not social media perspective. On social media, it's a lot about the people in the community. And on Patreon, it's giving you the inside scoop about what I've been doing on the ground to kind of get opportunities for you guys and all the conservationists involved. So yeah, being a part of that Patreon, you can choose to donate $1, $5, or $10 a month, and that will just really go towards helping me start up this venture and provide more opportunities for everyone in the community. So yeah, at the moment, that is the best way to help, but also to tell your story and to get involved. That's the most amazing help, because the more people that are part of Lonely Conservationists, the more people that are telling their stories, the more the stigma is being reduced and the more people are having this conversation. And maybe the conservation industry can change and it can improve for future generations if we have the guts to speak up and do something about it.
Okay, well, I'll definitely be including the Patreon link in the show notes below, as well as the link to the main blog website, so that everybody on here, if you are interested, you can submit your own blog to the Lonely Conservationist website and be featured on there. Now, the pair of us have ended up talking a lot about mental health on our own platforms recently, which is definitely not a direction that I expected to take with this at all. But I would love to know what inspired this conversation to start for you, apart from being depressed on your couch, and for Lonely Conservationists. And maybe if you could share some of your own experiences, maybe of feeling any mental health side effects of being in conservation.
Sure. So mental health wasn't something I expected to get into at all either. It's only when the blog started to get a bit dark that I realized a lot of this was out of my depth. And if anyone was actually needing to seek proper help, I wasn't qualified to be able to provide that to them. So I started reaching out to mental health organizations in Australia, and I've actually got a list on the website of mental health resources from all over the world. So at least if people are feeling really sad or depressed, or they don't want to go on anymore, they have those resources there and they have the supportive community that can help them. Because it just shocked me in some of the blogs, there was a darkness that I'd never experienced, and I thought I was struggling and I thought I was facing all these issues, but some people definitely experience it to a greater extent than me. And so that got me thinking about mental health and talking about mental health in the community. And a lot of the Lonely Conservationists who have submitted blogs actually do seek mental health help for these kinds of things, and it's really helped them. But it's interesting talking to other people because, as we were talking about before, the pressure that's put on us in the academic world and in conservation when there's not a lot of jobs and you're just trying to put your best foot forward, people probably did need to be diagnosed with a mental health disorder, but that would have just tipped them over the edge. It would have made them feel even more imperfect, or that would have made them feel like they would get less opportunities. So a lot of people actually put off seeking mental health help until after they graduated, which is really interesting just because of the stigmas surrounding mental health in the industry. There's like one time where I realized I should have got mental health help looking back, after I got back from my honors working 6 months in Indonesia, where the culture was it's a very Muslim culture and very restrictive towards women. And I had kids lighting fires on my porch. I was living across from a mosque with my boyfriend where we could have got arrested by living together. So I was constantly living in fear. And when I got home, I was even afraid to hold his hand in Australia. And there's some things that just stuck with me. And I feel like if I sought help and if I maybe spoke to a professional about it, the feelings I had would have not lasted as long. But I just thought I was too proud and strong and I had friends to talk to. And I think I actually carried the stigma of mental health and seeking help. And I was part of that problem, because the thing is with conservationists, like a lot of us don't have traditional mental disorders, but the things we feel come from the work that we do and from the conditions that we've been in. So a lot of us grow up thinking that we're fine and we don't need to seek this kind of help, because traditionally there's been nothing different or nothing. I don't want to use the word wrong, because even if you have a mental health disorder, there's nothing wrong with you. But I think sometimes you're in this mindset that if you admit that there is something wrong with you, it's just going to add a whole other layer of problems on. And I think that's, I guess, where it's hard, because I definitely do recommend people to seek help and because if you have a cut, you'll put a Band-Aid on it, but there's such a stigma around if you're feeling a bit sad or depressed, you don't want to seek help for it, where they're both medical issues and we should be treating them the same, but it's just the way that the industry is. I think even I feel the stigma of mental health, and that's something that I'm really trying to change as I go on in this journey.
Yeah, exactly. And I can definitely relate to feeling that stigma, and even not on a personal level, but I've seen it so many times in my peers, especially at the university, you see it a lot. And I think it's very easy for people to judge and to reinforce that stigma, like you mentioned. But it's so important to have those resources available. And it's really, really great that you have them on the Lonely Conservationist website, but also seeing other people talking about their own experiences seems to be really helpful, I guess, in reducing that stigma. So if you have experienced any mental health issues as a result of conservation, as we've both said, there are resources out there, both on Jessie's blog, on the Lonely Conservationist website, as well as on the EcoScientist website, and there is always mental health resources listed in the show notes below. In addition to that, if you have experienced any of the things that we've spoken about and are willing to share your story, especially on the Lonely Conservationist blog, because like we said, it really does help to break that stigma, and I think that is such a big part. So for me, I guess that's the biggest advice I have. Do you have any other advice for the listeners on mental health?
I think we just have to be in this together, and the more we're honest about what we're going through, the more I think it will be easier to talk about it in the future. And I think acknowledging that in conservation, we are in these situations where we are in isolating conditions, or we might be in areas where it's culturally challenging. I think admitting that that might be a hard time, and although we're not depressed 90% of the time, we do need help dealing with the small things that we do go through, because even though they may be a small part of our lives, they're really big and they do have lasting impacts at the time that they occur. So I think just coming together and making it more acceptable and widely known that it's okay to go and seek help for these kinds of things, even if they're not chronic or long lasting.
Yeah, exactly. Now, in addition to that, we've spoken a lot about mental health and I guess the feelings that people have. Another thing that a lot of conservationists experience is imposter syndrome. And one of the Lonely Conservationist mission statements is to help conservationists overcome imposter syndrome by valuing them as a part of a close-knit community and the work they're doing for the planet. I personally have experienced imposter syndrome, and I experience it all the time, and it seems to be really common among the scientific community. But for our listeners that haven't heard of this before, do you think you could give us a rundown of what imposter syndrome is and maybe an example of when you felt this?
Sure. So imposter syndrome is thinking that your achievements aren't good enough and feeling like you're a fraud. A lot of people in professions have this, and it's just really insane. A really good example is when I ask people to submit a blog and they're like, oh, I don't have a job, or I'm not good enough for this. And it's so crazy to me that people don't think they're good enough to talk about when they've struggled. Like, the amount of pressure and the standards that we put on each other is just crazy, that people don't think they're good enough to talk about how they've struggled. Like, that's insane. So it's about not feeling worthy. And I think I even felt it the other day. So when I got accepted into this incubator program, we all went off to Sydney to start this intensive training period. And on the first day, I looked around and everyone had these amazing businesses that they were starting up. And I had no business knowledge. I was just a girl standing there, and I just had a big community of people behind me expecting me to do something to help them, but I didn't really know what I was going to do. And I just felt really weird that I was selected. I didn't feel like I belonged there. And it just took me a long time to get over that. So that day we all had to write permission slips, and I gave myself permission to let all my fear go. And in the 4 days I was there, just believe anything was possible. And the next day I came up with this really amazing business idea that I've been working on ever since, which I don't think I would have been able to come up with if I kept in my head and kept doubting myself. So I think even though I've achieved so much in my life, that has been pretty cool. And I'm an adult now, I'm not a kid. Like, I should stop thinking of myself as a child and that every adult is smarter than me or knows more than me. I think that even though I've come so far, I still am feeling this way. Like, just the other week, even yesterday, I was given a really cool opportunity and I just couldn't believe that it was happening to me. I thought I was too young and too inexperienced, but I think in the conservation industry, when we're not paid much and we're expected to work really long hours or do really intense hardcore work and not get paid or not get value in terms of respect or, I don't know, praise from mentors or bosses, it's hard for us to give our self-worth if other people aren't giving it to us as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I can definitely relate to that. I've experienced imposter syndrome so many times, but it's funny that you mentioned the adulting thing, I guess. For me personally, I recently was unpackaging like a pool toy for a kid, one of my siblings actually, and I was reading it and I was like, oh, it says adult supervision is required for this. And I was like, well, I guess you can't play with it. And then my brother was like, you are an adult. And I had to think about it for a while and I was like, oh my God. Like, I don't see myself as an adult. And I think that's really weird because I am. Like, I don't live at home. I, pay my own way and literally everything in life. I've got a degree. I've got a job. I do all of these, like, adulting things. And yet still I can sit there and read something that says adult supervision necessary and think that I'm not adulty enough for that. And I think that kind of crosses over into your career and, into degrees and into whatever it is that you're doing. A lot of people just see that as like, well, I'm less worthy, or I'm younger, or I'm not as experienced, or I, don't belong here, and all those sorts of feelings. And I guess it all just kind of stems from that one thing. And I see that a lot on social media, that whole like when you don't know how to adult. So maybe it's just a common theme among our generation. I'm really not sure.
Yeah, and I think that's the core of my imposter syndrome, is still feeling like a child. And I think whenever anybody comes up to me and like gives me praise, or they ask me a question, or they want some of my time, or want to give me an opportunity, I have to really convince myself that I'm worthy of it, and that actually, as you said, like I am living at home, I am working, I'm paying taxes, like we are worthy of these opportunities. I think it's just hard when you transition from a kid to an adult. You don't have that ceremony of like, congratulations, here's your adult certificate, you are now respected.
You're now respected. Yeah. And it's funny because like I thought, oh, I would get a degree and I would just be like instantly respected. I would know all these things, and I finished, I was like, wow, I feel absolutely no different to when I started, which is really funny. And I think we all just need to kind of maybe step back, look where we've come from, look how far we've come, all of us, regardless of what situation we're in, and see the changes we've made, see how far we've come, and really acknowledge that, and acknowledge that you are worthy of whatever it is that you've achieved, and that you are worthy to stand behind or beside or in front of the people that are around you, just based on who you are, And I think imposter syndrome is something that I guess we're all going to experience, but there's a lot of different ways to manage it. And recently I watched a really cool YouTube video about different ways to deal with imposter syndrome. So I'm going to link that one in the show notes if anybody wants to watch that. So to segue into a slightly different topic, through Lonely Conservationists, you've got a lot of resources and partnerships, particularly regarding mental health. And you've spoken a bit about providing paid opportunities to conservationists. Do you think you could tell us a little bit about those resources and where listeners can find them?
Sure. So as we mentioned before, all the mental health resources are all listed on the website, but we've added a new membership feature. So if you're interested in getting employment, networking, or career opportunities, you can sign up as a member, and these are the people that I'll be contacting as I start my new business, trying to provide conservationists with more job opportunities. So that's where the membership's coming in. The Instagram page is more for communication, collaboration, finding people who relate to you. It's more casual, but for those people that are seriously wanting to get involved with job opportunities, and also when I create these job opportunities, I want to be providing value for value. That's what I've started calling it. Because I want to give these people access to networking opportunities and to night walks and exclusive events like animal releases, like for endangered or threatened species that are maybe in sanctuaries or that kind of thing. I want to use my connections to be able to give conservationists around Australia and the world more opportunities to connect and to collaborate. So we're not all butting heads all the time for resources, that we're all working together and we can actually make a positive difference for the industry.
Yeah, that's really cool. And like you mentioned, collaboration is really important. I think that if we collaborated more, even across fields, we could achieve so many things that I think we probably wouldn't be able to achieve if we were butting heads for resources and not working together. And I think throughout pretty much every field, not just those within science and conservation, but we need to work together a lot more, especially in our current climate, our political climate, pretty much everything that's going on. We all need to work together and realize that we're in this together, we're not alone, and we can't keep butting heads for resources, otherwise things aren't going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And that's been an
Yeah.
actual side effect of Lonely Conservationists is I've met some people here in Victoria where they've needed help with tree planting days, and because I've had experience doing that, I was able to help them create these days to one instance was planting trees for the critically endangered helmeted honeyeaters. And so I wouldn't have been involved in saving this critically endangered species if it wasn't for meeting up with her and collaborating on projects. So I think if you are a conservationist and you do want to widen your impact, collaboration is such an amazing way, reaching out to new people and connecting with new people.
Yeah, definitely. And honeyeaters are amazing. So that's like a big bonus.
Incredible birds.
So one of the things that I find really interesting about Lonely Conservationists is the whole community side of it. I realize that's the point of Lonely Conservationists, but we've only touched on it a little bit. And I feel like this is something we really need as a community and as a whole planet right now. And I think having a community that allows people to connect with other conservationists in the way that we've just spoken about could really lay the foundations for some really innovative partnerships that could really make a difference in the world. And that brings us back to collaboration, like we mentioned. And you said you have a members section on your website, but within that, you have these country-based chats set up. Can you tell me a little bit about these chats and what countries are your members from and what sort of conservation topics are people talking about that my listeners might be interested in?
Sure. So on the Instagram page, there's been a few people wanting to connect with other like-minded people, and some do on an individual basis connect with people who have been writing blogs and people who they've seen have followed the page. But there was a large request to do country-based chats in the DMs. There's been an incredible America-based chat where all the people from America are really involved, and they're all asking each other questions about using R or what courses they want to do, or do you want to come to this event? Has anyone heard of this news article? And even though there's countrywide chats for a lot of different countries that I set up, America seems to be the one that's collaborating the most and connecting the most and helping each other the most. And it's just really interesting to watch from an outsider's perspective, even just facilitating these groups and seeing what happens within them. Unfortunately for the Australian group, it's usually just me providing commentary on what's going on and what opportunities there would be for them. So it's less the Australians chatting independently amongst themselves about organic opportunities, but the American group for sure have been really chatting about some exciting things, and it's interesting to just be a fly on the wall and watch that. But unfortunately on Instagram you can only have 35 members in a chat, so I think I will need to integrate a bit of a chat function on the website so it's more widely accessible and people can just enter into it as they wish.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good idea. I will definitely jump on that Australia chat because it sounds like it needs a little bit of love. So for anyone out there that's interested in something similar to the American chat that you just talked about, if you're an Aussie, feel free to jump on that. But it's really incredible that there's such a huge conversation going on in the US when we're both here in Australia on the other side of the world in completely different time zones. It's just crazy to think that you could have such a huge impact on a community all the way over there, you know?
Yeah, it's really insane. And I don't know if it's because of the way the US government is running at the moment, or if people feel more inclined to do something or to really go out there and seize opportunities. But the people from the US have been loving each other's blogs and really complimentary and helping each other out. And even they've gotten to the stage where they've started to send memes, so they must be getting really friendly.
Oh, wow, that's really incredible. I see that a lot on Facebook groups, actually. I'm in this Facebook group. Oh, gosh, what's it called? I don't even remember, but it's basically post-grad memes, and it is hilarious. And it's mostly Americans, but the whole group has just turned into Meme Central, and that's not how it started out at all. I'm pretty sure it started out as some sort of networking group, and it just turned into memes, and now it's people from all over the world just enjoying post-grad memes. It's a really good way to pass the time, actually, a really good way to procrastinate. So it's really interesting to hear that the same thing's happening within your groups.
Yeah, it's just a shame that it's so private, because people who want to be added, it started off as a story where it's like, if you want to add this chat, follow this link. But now it's been around for a while, and I forget that it's there because I'm just watching the Americans talk. So I forget that I need to add new people in. So thanks for reminding me. I think this is something that I definitely need to integrate into the public site. It's just a shame because forums need to be moderated, and I'm just one person and I'm doing a lot at the moment, and I can't have the time to sit here and moderate forums all day, but maybe that's something I can think about into the future.
Yeah, that sounds like such a good idea. So moving forward from that, what do you think that you want to see more of in the scientific community in a broader sense, or maybe in the conservation community more specifically?
Two things, I think. The first one, as we touched on before, is collaboration. I just think so many problems in conservation can be solved by collaborating. And I think even in science and the academic community, everyone is so competitive in terms of resources. There's so many egos, and sometimes people make a lot of bad decisions for nature or for the scientific community because their ego is too big. And I think we need to drop that, leave it behind. And that comes into my second point, is that I think we need to start getting more authentic with how we talk about our experiences, because nothing's ever going to change unless we talk about it. And I think Lonely Conservationists grew so quickly because people were relieved that people were just being honest about what was going on in the industry, and they could finally take a breath of fresh air and realize that they weren't the only one. And I think in a world where everybody thinks they're the only one suffering, not a lot can happen. But if we all band together, work together, and help to solve each other's problems, then that's how change gets made.
Yeah, definitely. So do you have any advice specifically for conservationists that might be feeling lonely?
Yeah, there's the Lonely Conservationist based advice, which is go check out the blogs and then have your feelings normalized. You can relate to those blogs and feel like you're not alone, and then also connect with the different people who are writing the blogs and the people on the Instagram page. They're all incredible people, and if you want to go into a different industry, or if you're looking to do projects on this or that, there are so many people out there that can help you get into the fields that you want to get into and really help you along your journey. But the real truth advice coming from me and my experience is that we should all start embracing our loneliness, because our brains are wired to feel a range of different emotions, not just happiness. It would be weird if we felt happy all the time. And Lonely Conservationist was created because I was feeling lonely. It's even in the title. And I wouldn't have created something that's so important to me and now a lot of other people if I never embraced that loneliness and never acknowledged how I was feeling. And a lot of the things that have been so pivotal in my life have come from feelings of loneliness or isolation. And even my bird watching and bird photography has come from a time when I was stranded in a village in New South Wales and there were no people my age there. So I just bought a camera and decided to document every single bird on the property. And now that's my main wellness activity and the thing that keeps me sane and a really big passion of mine. So I think really embrace your loneliness, embrace your anger, embrace your fear, and then see what comes from that constructively.
Yeah, that is such good advice. I definitely have really learned to embrace other emotions apart from happiness and like you said, use them constructively. Loneliness for me turned into surfing and kayaking and also a little bit of photography, which seems to be really common among conservationists. And it really can be a way to, I guess, reconnect with yourself. Being alone isn't a bad thing. And I guess that's something that, like we said before, is, maybe another part of our culture that's been stigmatized and maybe has been turned into something that it never really was supposed to be in the first place. So it's really nice that you brought that up. And like you mentioned about anger and sadness, all those sorts of emotions can feel so many things. I mean, if you look at Greta Thunberg, oh my God, I love her. But most of what she's doing is fueled by so much anger and despair. And she wouldn't be doing such incredible things if she was happy right now. So I think it's important to remember that good things don't always come from being 100% happy.
Yeah, we shouldn't be afraid of negative emotions, because my whole conservation journey started when I was 5 years old and I was so mad that adults weren't doing anything about deforestation, and I felt like I had to go on this lifelong journey to do something myself, and I never would have got into the industry if I wasn't angry, and I'm pretty sure nobody would have got into conservation if they weren't angry. So I think a lot of beautiful things come out of anger and sadness and loneliness. So I think, yeah, we also need to reduce the stigma of feeling these feelings and acknowledging these feelings.
Oh, wow. I don't even know what to say to all of that, to be honest. You're just like, you're incredible. So
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we're going to end the interview there. I've had such an incredible chat with you, Jess. So thank you so much for letting me interview you. And thank you for creating Lonely Conservationists. I cannot wait to see where everything goes.
No worries. Thanks for having me, and thanks for creating the EcoScientist podcast, because what you talk about is so relevant to so many lonely conservationists. And when I listen to your podcast, I'm like, yes, preach it, sister. Tell everyone.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. But for my listeners, if any of you are interested in any of the resources that we've mentioned, or if you're interested in being a part of the Lonely Conservationist community, don't forget to check out the show notes below. I'll have a few links there, and I'll get Jess to add her in as well. Especially look out for those mental health links. They're in the show notes of every single episode, like I mentioned before. So thanks again, Jess, for being part of this episode. Really appreciate that, and we'll chat to you all in the next episode. So that was episode 6 of the EcoScientist podcast with Jessie Panizzolo from Lonely Conservationist. I'm your host, Amalya Valley, wishing you a great day or a great night wherever you are.